The moving truck had barely finished backing into my driveway when I saw the flashing red and blue lights pulling up behind. Two officers stepped out of their patrol car, their expressions serious as they approached me. I set down the box I was carrying and wiped the sweat from my forehead, wondering what could possibly be wrong. "Sir, we received a report of an unauthorized squatter on this property," the first officer said, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "We're going to need to see some identification and proof that you have permission to be." From across the cul-de-sac, I noticed a woman watching with her arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She stood on her perfectly manicured lawn like a general surveying a battlefield, clearly convinced she was protecting her pristine neighborhood from someone who didn't belong. This was my first real encounter with the infamous HOA president, though I didn't know it yet. Just 3 weeks earlier, I had been sitting in a lawyer's office, tears still fresh in my eyes as I listened to the reading of my Uncle Harold's will. He had passed away after a brief illness, leaving me not just with grief, but with an unexpected inheritance: his beautiful suburban home in Oakage Estates. Uncle Harold had always been more like a father to me than an uncle, and knowing he'd thought of me in his final arrangements both warmed and broke my heart. I had driven out to see the house the week after the funeral, marveling at the craftsman-style architecture and the mature oak trees that lined the street. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood I dreamed of living in: quiet, well-maintained, with kids riding bikes and neighbors chatting over fences. I'd started making plans immediately, giving notice at my apartment and arranging for movers. That's when I met her for the first time. I was measuring the garage to see if my workbench would fit when a woman in her 50s marched up the driveway. Her bleached blonde hair was styled in an aggressive bob, and she wore a blazer despite the warm weather, like armor for suburban warfare. "Excuse me," she said in a tone that suggested she wasn't asking to be excused at all. "What exactly do you think you're doing on this property?" I explained that I was Harold Morrison's nephew and that I'd inherited the house. Her face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, annoyance, and finally determination. "I'm Patricia Thornton, president of the Oakage Estates, HOA," she announced, as if expecting me to bow. "And I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding. This house cannot simply be transferred to you. We have strict regulations about who can purchase property in this neighborhood. Only approved residents who have gone through our vetting process are allowed to live here." I tried to explain that I hadn't purchased anything. The house was willed to me, but Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Inheritance, purchase, it doesn't matter. The HOA bylaws are very clear. You'll need to submit an application, provide references, undergo a background check, and attend an interview with the board. Until then, you are not authorized to move into this property." The conversation went downhill from there. I pointed out that I had legal documentation, that the house was mine free and clear. She threatened legal action, claiming the HOA had the right to block any resident they deemed unsuitable. By the time she stormed off, promising to look into this matter, I knew I had a fight on my hands. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia ramped up her campaign against me. When the moving company arrived to give me an estimate, she was there within minutes, harassing them about permits and threatening to have their truck towed. She called code enforcement, claiming the house had violations that made it uninhabitable, though the inspector found nothing wrong and seemed confused about why he'd been called out. The rumors started next. Patricia began telling neighbors that I had forged the inheritance documents, that Harold had never mentioned a nephew, that I was probably some scam artist who preyed on elderly homeowners. She even suggested I might be dangerous, hinting darkly about my suspicious background to anyone who would listen. She managed to rally a small group of HOA loyalists to her cause, mostly retirees with too much time and too little empathy. They started a petition to have me evicted before I'd even moved in, claiming it was for the safety and standards of the community. One of them, a man named Gerald, actually stood at the end of my driveway with a clipboard trying to get signatures from delivery drivers. I tried to handle things diplomatically. I brought copies of all my legal documents to the HOA office, showing the notarized will, the death certificate, The court's probate confirmation. Patricia barely glanced at them before sliding them back across the desk. These can be forged, she said with a dismissive wave. We've seen it before. Con artists are getting very sophisticated these days. Until our lawyers verify every single document, which could take months, you are not to set foot on that property except for basic maintenance. Her intimidation tactics escalated. She had her followers take photos of me whenever I visited the house, claiming they were documenting trespassing. She sent me cease and desist letters from a lawyer who I later discovered was her brother-in-law and not even licensed to practice in our state. She posted warnings on the community Facebook page about the illegal occupant trying to infiltrate their neighborhood, but I had waited long enough. My uncle had left me this house and I was going to live in it. I scheduled the movers for a Saturday morning, hoping that moving in on the weekend might avoid some of the drama. I should have known better, which brings us back to that moment with the police in my driveway. As the officers waited for my response, I stayed calm despite my racing heart. Officers, I'm happy to show you my documentation. This house was left to me by my uncle, Harold Morrison. I have all the paperwork right here in my car. I retrieved my folder. I'd learned to keep it close at hand and showed them the will, the probate court's confirmation, the deed now in my name, and my driver's license. The second officer scanned through everything carefully while the first kept an eye on the scene. Everything looks to be in order, sir, the second officer said, handing back my papers. I apologize for the inconvenience. We received a 911 call about a break-in in progress. Let me guess, I said, allowing a hint of sarcasm to creep into my voice. The caller's name was Patricia Thornton. The officers exchanged a look. We can't disclose that information, the first one said carefully. But I will say this, filing a false 911 report is a serious offense. If someone is harassing you, you have the right to file a complaint. Just then, I noticed one of my new neighbors, a young woman named Angela, holding up her phone. She'd been filming the entire exchange. She gave me a thumbs up and called out, "Got it all on video. This is ridiculous." The officers turned their attention to Patricia, who had started walking over, probably expecting to see me in handcuffs. Her confident stride faltered when the first officer approached her instead. "Ma'am, did you place a 911 call about this address?" he asked. Patricia's chin went up defiantly. "I saw someone breaking into a house that I know is supposed to be vacant. As HOA president, it's my duty to protect our community." "Sir," the officer turned back to me. "Would you like to press charges for filing a false report?" I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "Not right now, but could you please make a report about this incident? I have a feeling I might need documentation later." The officer nodded and spent the next few minutes taking statements. Patricia stood there, her face growing redder by the minute as she realized her plan had backfired. When the police finally left after warning her about misusing emergency services, she stormed off without a word. But Angela wasn't done. Within hours, her video was posted online with the title, "Ha Karen Calls 911 on Homeowner Moving into His Own House." By that evening, it had thousands of views. By the next morning, it had gone viral. The comment section was brutal. People shared their own HOA horror stories, tagged news outlets, and called for Patricia's resignation. Someone found the Oak Ridge Estates Facebook page and flooded it with angry messages. The property management company's phone rang off the hook with complaints. Within days, the attention forced the HOA into full damage control mode. The property management company released a statement distancing themselves from Patricia's actions. Other residents who had been silent before started speaking up, sharing their own stories of Patricia's overreach. It turned out I wasn't her first target. She had a history of harassing new residents, especially those she deemed didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. I decided it was time to fight back legally. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes and filed formal harassment complaints. We sent cease and desist letters not just to Patricia but to the HOA board, warning them that any further interference with my lawful occupancy would result in a lawsuit. The online backlash. Moving truck had barely finished backing into my driveway when I saw the flashing red and blue lights pulling up behind it. Two officers stepped out of their patrol car, their expressions serious as they approached me. I set down the box I was carrying and wiped the sweat from my forehead.